Once, the earth was a garden, unspoiled, unhurried. The first people were its guardians. They lived by the great clock of the seasons and the laws laid down by their ancestors. They saw the magic in fire and the spirit in all things. The centuries flowed past. Empires grew outward from behind the safety of city walls. Great powers flourished. Emperors and their gods waged war with weapons of iron and bronze and cold steel. Far beyond the horizons of the old world, the tribes and the clans lived as they had from the beginning. The great empires came. They saw great wealth for the taking. The tribes and the clans resisted the invasions and were hunted like wild animals, enslaved, raped, massacred. All of this happened to all the clans, to all the tribes who ever roamed Earth. In dark corners of our planet, it happens still. This is the story of what happened to the men and women who called themselves simply Bama, the people, and of one tribe, the Tjapukai. For countless millennia, the Tjapukai and their neighbors lived in harmony with the forest. Their land was sacred. The story waters of the Bama, the people, is written on the body of the land, as it once was on the bodies of the initiated. The ancestors revealed the sacred path to be followed, the secrets of their environment, the seasons of the hunt, and the laws to ensure that game was not hunted to extinction. They passed down survival skills. With each retelling of the sacred creation stories in dance and song, they tied again the thread that held together the land, the people, the law, the past, and the present. A network of pathways connected their country. Hunters, gatherers, and warriors traveled these ancient tracks. Messengers moved along them with great speed over great distances. Generation upon generation lived with the beauty and the dangers of their forest homeland, unified by their beliefs and their laws. Then, in the blink of an eye, the Tjapukai and their neighbors, the Yirganji, were sentenced to a lingering death. I am Bugal of the Badjigal clan. When we first saw the Gadja, the white men, we thought they were spirits. The spirits of long-dead Tjapukai people returning to us. We were afraid. Etiquette everywhere in the world dictates the correct approach of an uninvited stranger. There was a correct etiquette to be observed when approaching, uninvited, the land of the Bama. Protocol demanded a challenge and its acceptance. Carl Lumholtz, Norwegian scientist and traveler, wrote, "As soon as our men halted, 3 men from the hostile ranks came forward in a threatening manner, running forward in long elastic leaps. They jumped like cats and fell down behind their shields. They came within 20 yards of our men. They halted, ready for the fight. 3 men came forward from our side and accepted the challenge." George Dalrymple, explorer and politician of the day, wrote, "The whole of the valuable agricultural coast country just discovered is free from vested interests injurious to its rapid development and is now open to public selection. The first land sales were held in Cairns in 1877. A suggestion that a portion of the proceeds should be held in trust for the traditional owners was lost in the roar of the land rush. Land-hungry farmers hunted the people of the forest and gave the sport a harmless name: snipe shooting. Shooting a snipe has an innocent ring to it, obscuring the true description: cold-blooded murder. The Tjapukai and their neighbors were given new names. No longer men, women, children. They became niggers, gins, pickaninnies. Wunyami, now known as Green Island, place of the haunted spirits. Early in April 1873, a group of Palm Island men and women were press-ganged, blackbirded, aboard a fishing boat to dive for bêche de mer, the sea slug. They dropped anchor here, off this island. At nightfall, the fishermen forced the Tjapukai men to stay aboard the cutter. The women they took ashore. The next day, the 2 white fishermen were killed. The killings rapidly grew in stature to become a bloodthirsty massacre. Indigenous people of the region, including the Tjapukai, were tried in the court of white opinion and found guilty of savage treachery. Unique among Australian tribes, the Bama mummified the dead. For 9 months, the bodies lay waiting for the spirits to return to earth. Close relatives mourned their loss. Whites misinterpreted the custom and branded the Tjapukai cannibals. Queen Victoria, half a world away, went about the business of ruling the empire as her loyal subjects busily raped the body of the sacred land, soiling the streams, cutting great scars into the forests, destroying the habitats of the game, fencing large tracts of country, and cutting off the Bama from their traditional food sources. Starvation forced the Tjapukai to steal food for survival. The settlers found that leaving baits of bread laced with rat poison discouraged them from the practice. As the railway made its way up the barren gorge, every dynamite charge became a desecration of the pathway of the sacred Storywater snake. Every fettler's spike became another nail in the body of the Tjapukai and their neighbors. The Bama struck back at the whites where and when they could. The native police, recruited from distant tribal groups, tracked down their brothers. Few were brought in for trial. Many were massacred. Horrors were committed by this paramilitary force, led by white officers and sponsored by Her Majesty's government in Queensland. Rapes, murders, floggings, the ill treatment of women and children. John Atherton, a cattleman, engaged the Tjapukai to drive a mob of cattle up to the high country from Cairns. He promised them a bullock as payment. The cattle were duly delivered, and the men returned to collect their bullock. Instead, Atherton tried to give them a horse. The Tjapukai were outraged. Atherton had cheated them, so they took their bullock. Atherton called in the native police. Meanwhile, the Bama were preparing a feast. The bullock was butchered, and the prime cuts were placed into an earth oven to bake. A young girl, we only know her by her Gadja name, Buttercup, burnt her hand on a hot stone. An older woman led her to the river to bathe and soothe the burn. Rifle shots reverberated through the bush. The two looked back to the camp and saw, to their horror, the native police firing into their people gathered around the oven. Men, women, children fell in the hail of bullets. Terrified, Buttercup and the older woman fled. The price for a Tjapukai life had now fallen well below that for a bullock. By the year the British Empire celebrated the jubilee of Queen Victoria's reign, The Tjapukai were beggars in their own land, fringe dwellers, starving by the roadside, in humpies of cast-off hessian and tin. The undeclared war was over. Once proud warriors, self-reliant hunters and gatherers were driven from towns with stock whips, manacled and imprisoned. Addicted to bad food, alcohol and opium, their children dispatched to dormitories.
Mr. Speaker, it is the government's pleasure to introduce an amendment to the Aboriginal Protection and Restriction of the Sale of Opium Acts of 1897. I do hereby order that the Aboriginals hereunder named be removed from Kuranda in the district of Cairns to the reserve at Mona Mona.
The remainder of the Tjapukai and their neighbours came to their mission prison at Mona Mona. One of the survivors tells the story.
When the policemen came down to our camp, some people used to run away because they didn't want to go to the mission. There were no house built yet, only a sheet of iron and a grass humpy.
The year the Great War began, the first mission building was completed, a house for the missionaries. Within a few years, many acres at Mona Mona were cleared, fenced and cultivated. A sawmill was built, and the Bama broke their backs felling and milling timber, building houses for missionaries and a dormitory for boys and girls, isolating them from their families in the humpies. In 1920, a cyclone devastated Mona Mona Mission. 3 buildings remained standing. The people camped in the open. 13 died from exposure. A year later, rebuilding was completed. And so the Tjapukai laboured for the missionaries. Their only payment was the joy of service.
House and out the door, chopping wood and scrubbing floors, washing, ironing, mending too, sometimes making kids but just you. I'll do it all for Jesus, I'll do it all for Jesus, I'll do it all for Jesus, He done so much for me.
The traditional foods of the ancestors were replaced with new tastes. More and more, the children were isolated from the influence of the old ways. Discipline in the mission was strictly enforced. Runaways were publicly flogged. Minor disciplinary breaches were harshly punished. Persistent offenders were shipped to Palm Island, an Aboriginal penitentiary. In the time, there was happiness too. Then, in 1962, the people of the forest saw their world collapse yet again. The Queensland government announced plans to build a dam on Flaggy Creek. When filled, it would flood the Mona Mona mission lands. The homes, the dormitories, the kitchens, the church, their half-century of back-breaking work. The mission was closed, its people evicted. The society they had built over all those years was destroyed. They were forced to return to a life as fringe dwellers of the white community. The dam has never been built. In the years since, the people of the forest have struggled with the 20th century. Some have conquered their bitter history magnificently. Elwyn Carroll, known to everyone as Uncle Breadman, a respected elder and a living history book. When he was a young man, his father passed to him the creation stories of the Tjapukai, knowledge he's handed down to a new generation. Enid Boyle, everybody's grandmother, presides over an extended family. A staunch churchgoer, she sings in the choir every Saturday. Grandad Selman, a tribal elder who passes down knowledge to the younger generations. Mario, a forest ranger who works managing traditional Tjapukai land and preserving the ancient rock art. Rhonda, a community leader and guardian of the ancient Tjapukai artifacts. Coralie Wason, a mother of 4, is a recognized artist whose work has received acclaim locally and overseas. Her hope for her kids is straightforward. Jobs that will fit them for survival in today's world and still keep their culture alive. These empty chairs are a symbol. They represent absent Tjapukai, men and women who should be here today, happy and proud. Instead, they're trapped inside a destructive world of drugs, alcohol, and violence. Some are serving prison sentences, victims of an unsympathetic judicial system. Some are desperately ill. The life expectancy of Aboriginal people is 20 years below the national average. Ultimately, the survival of the people of the forest will depend on a new generation. Young people like Billy Ja, William, a self-taught guitarist who has dreams of making it to the top of the pop music charts. And Desanta, who is currently rated number 2 in Australia in junior division darts. Barry, who is studying cultural heritage at university, searches for old bush medicines in his spare time. Willie, who plays guitar in his reggae band. And little Trent, a baby who just wants to sleep. A decade ago, Tjapukai was a near-forgotten language. Today, it is being resurrected. A new generation can communicate in their mother tongue. The story waters can be told again in the language of the people of the rainforest.